Beneath the glittering lights of Hollywood's golden age lay a darkness few dared to see. Behind the flawless smiles, elegant gowns, and silver screen glamour hid lives consumed by addiction, abuse, and unbearable secrets. These were stars worshipped by millions, yet destroyed by fame itself. In this video, we uncover the shocking truths behind 13 golden age celebrities with the most horrifying secret life. Stories so disturbing, they forever shattered the illusion of Hollywood perfection. Judy Garland, the price of a manufactured dream. Under the warm glow of Technicolor, Judy Garland looked like pure magic. Her voice soared with innocence and longing, and her eyes shimmered with childlike wonder. To millions, she was Dorothy, the eternal girl who believed dreams could come true. But off-screen, Judy's life was the very opposite of the fantasy she embodied. Behind every note she sang was pain. Pain manufactured, packaged, and sold by the studio system that owned her soul. From the moment she signed with MGM at just 13, Judy's life was no longer hers. Studio executives saw her as a product, not a person. They criticized her looks, calling her the fat one, next to glamorous peers. To keep her thin and tireless, MGM fed her amphetamines by day and sleeping pills by night, a toxic cycle that would consume her for life. The same executives who praised her performances also destroyed her innocence, forcing her into relentless filming schedules that left her broken and exhausted before adulthood. As fame grew, her sense of self disappeared. By her 20s, Judy was already addicted, oscillating between dazzling performances and complete breakdowns. The public saw a smiling icon, but behind that smile were failed marriages, mounting debts, and a growing dependency on pills. Hollywood loved her talent but discarded her humanity. She was fired, rehired, and publicly humiliated, yet always returned to the stage, desperate for love and validation she never received. In the end, Judy Garland was a prisoner of the dream she helped sell. Her tragic death in 1969, an overdose of barbiturates at age 47, shocked the world but surprised few who knew her suffering. Fans remembered the girl who followed the yellow brick road, but Judy never found her way home. Her story remains a haunting reminder that Hollywood's magic often hides the cruelest machinery, one that can turn even the brightest stars into ghosts of themselves. 2. Montgomery Clift, the handsome face that fell apart. In the golden age of Hollywood, Montgomery Clift was every studio's dream, the brooding rebel, the sensitive heartthrob with eyes that could melt the screen. He brought something new to acting: vulnerability. Long before Brando or Dean, Clift made emotion masculine, redefining what it meant to be a leading man. But behind his quiet intensity was a man haunted by secrets, guilt, and self-destruction. A life that would slowly unravel in front of the cameras that once adored him. Born into privilege, Clift rejected easy comfort and chased authenticity. When he arrived in Hollywood in the late 1940s, he refused to sign long-term contracts, shocking executives who couldn't control him. He was deeply private, fiercely intelligent, and openly defiant, yet he carried a truth he could never reveal. In an era when being gay could end a career overnight, Clift lived in constant fear of exposure. That fear turned inward, becoming a silent war that consumed him. Then came the night that changed everything. In 1956, after leaving Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift crashed his car into a telephone pole. Taylor was the first to reach him, pulling his bloodied face from the wreckage before he suffocated. The accident shattered his jaw and left his once perfect face partially paralyzed. Hollywood's beautiful outsider was now visibly broken. From that moment, Clift's life divided into two halves, before and after. The studio tried to hide his decline, but the damage was irreversible. He drowned his pain in alcohol and pills, often arriving on set trembling, incoherent, and unrecognizable. Yet even in ruin, he delivered haunting performances, especially in Judgment at Nuremberg and The Misfits, filmed while his body was failing him. Friends called him the slowest suicide in Hollywood. On July 23, 1966, Montgomery Clift was found dead in his apartment at 45. The coroner called it a heart attack, but everyone knew his heart had been breaking for years. In the end, Clift became the very embodiment of his art, raw, tragic, and painfully human. He showed the world that vulnerability could be beautiful, but for him, it was fatal. Number 3, Joan Crawford, the mother, the monster, the mask. Few stars of Hollywood's golden age commanded power and presence like Joan Crawford. She was elegance personified, a survivor who climbed from poverty to the pinnacle of fame through sheer will. With her sculpted cheekbones, steel blue eyes, and unrelenting ambition, she became the very symbol of determination. To the public, she was the ultimate self-made woman, glamorous, sophisticated, untouchable. But behind the carefully constructed facade lay one of Hollywood's darkest and most controversial personal lives. Born Lucille Fay Lesueur in 1904, Crawford came from nothing. Abandoned by her father and exploited by her stepfather, she clawed her way into the studio system and refused to let go. MGM rebranded her, remade her, and marketed her as the embodiment of female strength. Yet the strength that dazzled audiences also came from deep wounds. Insecurity, obsession with control, and a need for validation that never faded. Behind closed doors, Crawford ruled her home with the same ruthless perfectionism she demanded of herself. In 1978, nearly a year after her death, her adopted daughter, Christina, released the infamous memoir Mommy Dearest. It painted a nightmarish portrait, a mother who beat her children with wire hangers, screamed at them for breathing too loudly, and forced them to live in constant terror. "No wire hangers ever" became a phrase of horror and legend. The public was shocked. Could Hollywood's elegant queen truly be a monster at home? Defenders called the book an exaggeration. Others whispered they had seen glimpses of the same rage. Crawford's obsession with image, alcohol dependency, and failed marriages hinted at a woman who was both victim and villain, crushed by the very standards she set for herself. She demanded perfection because she had been taught that love depended on it. When she died in 1977, alone in her Manhattan apartment, there was no grand farewell, only silence and scandal. 2 of her children were written out of her will. Her legacy became forever split between admiration and fear. For some, Joan Crawford remains the ultimate Hollywood success story. For others, she is a warning. Proof that behind the shimmering mask of fame can lurk the most horrifying kind of loneliness. The kind that turns love into control and perfection into cruelty. 4. Errol Flynn, the scandalous hero who couldn't escape himself. To moviegoers of the 1930s and 40s, Errol Flynn was everything a man was supposed to be. Daring, dashing, impossibly handsome. His sword flashed across the screen in Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, making him Hollywood's ultimate swashbuckling hero. Audiences adored his charm and charisma, and women idolized him as the embodiment of masculine fantasy. But the real Errol Flynn lived a life far darker than his cinematic legends, one steeped in addiction, scandal, and self-destruction. Born in Tasmania, Flynn was a restless spirit from the start, a drifter, adventurer, and womanizer long before fame found him. When Hollywood discovered him, the studios saw marketable danger. Warner Bros. Turned him into the romantic rogue who always got the girl, but off-screen, he embraced that image too completely. His parties were legendary, overflowing with alcohol, drugs, and young women. The line between performance and reality blurred until the man and the myth became one. Then, in 1942, the fantasy collapsed. Flynn was accused of statutory rape by 2 teenage girls. The trial became one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood history. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and the phrase "in like Flynn" was born, a cynical nod to his reputation for seduction. Though he was acquitted, the damage was permanent. His career survived, but his soul did not. He had become both a symbol of reckless freedom and moral decay. As years passed, Flynn's charm curdled into bitterness. He drank heavily, lived beyond his means, and sought refuge in younger women and empty pleasures. The studios that once celebrated him now whispered about his decline. By the 1950s, his face was bloated, his hands trembled, and his eyes, once sparkling with mischief, were dull with regret. In 1959, at just 50, Errol Flynn died of a massive heart attack in the arms of a teenage girlfriend. The autopsy revealed a body ravaged by years of abuse, the liver of an old man, the heart of a dying one. The Hollywood hero who had lived like a legend left behind nothing but debts, rumors, and a reputation both glamorous and grotesque. Flynn's story is the perfect Hollywood tragedy. A man who mistook fame for freedom, pleasure for peace, and paid the price with everything he had. 5. Marilyn Monroe, the goddess who was never allowed to be human. She was the face of desire, the breathless voice of seduction, the woman who made the world believe in glamour. Marilyn Monroe was not just a star, she was a myth built from loneliness, perfection, and pain. Every photograph radiated confidence, yet behind that smile was a terrified child named Norma Jean, begging to be loved. Her beauty made her immortal, her fragility made her doomed. Born in 1926 to a mother lost to mental illness, Marilyn spent her childhood in foster homes, abused and abandoned. When Hollywood discovered her, she understood the price of survival. Give them what they want. So she transformed herself, dyed hair, changed her walk, and created the most irresistible persona in American history. The dumb blonde act was her shield, a performance she perfected even as it destroyed her sense of self. Beneath the diamonds and champagne laughs was a woman suffocating under the weight of expectation. Marilyn's private life was chaos disguised as romance. Her marriages to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio and playwright Arthur Miller collapsed under her insecurities and their inability to see past her image. She sought comfort in pills, therapy, and a string of dangerous affairs, including rumored entanglements with President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. Hollywood treated her like a commodity, studios exploiting her sexuality while mocking her intelligence. When she tried to assert control over her career, she was branded difficult. By the early 1960s, the cracks were visible. Late arrivals, missed shoots, and public breakdowns turned her into tabloid prey. Yet even in her lowest moments, she remained luminous, a living contradiction of power and helplessness. Her final film, The Misfits, written for her by Miller, mirrored her reality. A beautiful woman lost in a cruel world that only loved her when she was performing. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home, a bottle of barbiturates beside her bed. Officially, it was ruled a probable suicide. Unofficially, it became one of the most whispered conspiracies in Hollywood history. She was only 36. In death, Marilyn became eternal, a tragic saint of fame, forever frozen in youth and vulnerability. The woman who symbolized desire died utterly alone. And the saddest secret of all? She never wanted to be a goddess, only a woman who could finally stop pretending. Number 6. Howard Hughes, the genius who went mad. In the golden corridors of power and fame, few shone brighter than Howard Hughes. He was the embodiment of the American dream, a film producer, aviation pioneer, and billionaire playboy who conquered every field he touched. Handsome, daring, and brilliant, he dated the most beautiful women in Hollywood, from Katharine Hepburn to Ava Gardner. To the world, Hughes was unstoppable, the man who built empires and lived among the stars. But behind the legend was a man descending into a nightmare of obsession, paranoia, and madness. Born in 1905 into wealth, Hughes inherited his father's tool company and turned it into a financial powerhouse. His true passions, however, were film and flight. In the 1930s and 40s, he poured fortunes into movies like Hell's Angels and The Outlaw, always chasing perfection, always pushing boundaries. His ambition made him a genius. His perfectionism made him a tyrant. Actors and engineers alike feared his explosive temper and impossible demands. As he grew older, Hughes's eccentricities deepened into pathology. After a near-fatal plane crash in 1946, he became addicted to painkillers, the beginning of a spiral he would never escape. He began isolating himself from the world, terrified of germs, refusing to shake hands, and locking himself in darkened hotel rooms for months. He demanded that his aides deliver his food wrapped in tissue, and if they disobeyed, he fired them on the spot. By the 1950s, the once glamorous mogul was a ghost, hiding from sunlight and living entirely through memos. Despite his growing instability, Hughes's wealth and power shielded him from scrutiny. He bought entire hotels to live in, acquired casinos and airlines, and influenced politics from behind the curtain. Yet every new acquisition seemed to feed his paranoia. He was convinced enemies wanted to poison him, that the government spied on his every move. In truth, no one needed to destroy Howard Hughes. He was doing it himself. By the time he died in 1976, Hughes was unrecognizable, a skeletal recluse with long hair, broken teeth, and needle scars covering his arms. The once dashing millionaire had vanished into his own fears. When authorities found his body on a private jet, they identified him only by fingerprints. Howard Hughes's life is the ultimate cautionary tale of power without peace, a man who conquered the skies but could never escape the prison of his mind. His genius changed history, but his madness defined his legacy. 7. Elizabeth Taylor, the queen who couldn't escape her heart. Few stars ever embodied glamour like Elizabeth Taylor. With her violet eyes, flawless beauty, and unshakable confidence, she wasn't just adored, she was worshipped. From her teenage debut in National Velvet to her Oscar-winning turns in Butterfield 8 and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Taylor defined the very image of Hollywood royalty. She lived in diamonds, silk, and scandal. But behind her regal facade lay a woman trapped by her own desires, her fame, and an unending hunger for love that nearly destroyed her. Born in London in 1932 and raised in California, Elizabeth was thrust into the spotlight before she could understand what fame meant. MGM shaped her into a goddess, teaching her to smile through pain, to charm on command. Yet the child star soon became a woman no studio could control. By her early 20s, she had married twice and buried one husband, Mike Todd, whose death in a plane crash shattered her psyche. From that point on, love became both her addiction and her undoing. Her most infamous romance, the torrid affair with Richard Burton, began on the set of Cleopatra, a film so extravagant it nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. Their chemistry was volcanic, their arguments legendary. Married twice to each other, they were bound by passion and poison in equal measure. "I love Richard," she once said, "but I can't live with him, and I can't live without him." Their relationship was a mirror of her life, dazzling, destructive, unforgettable. As her career slowed, Taylor's private battles became public. She struggled with alcoholism and a crippling addiction to painkillers. Her health collapsed under the weight of fame, back surgeries, near-death pneumonia, and endless tabloid scrutiny. Yet somehow, through every scandal, she emerged unbroken, transformed into something larger than life. She used her fame to advocate for AIDS awareness long before it was fashionable, proving that empathy, not beauty, defined her truest self. When Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011, surrounded by family and wrapped in white lilies, she left behind a fortune in jewels and a legend even more luminous. 8 marriages, 2 Oscars, and countless heartbreaks had shaped her into an icon of resilience. She was the last queen of Hollywood's golden empire, a woman who lived every emotion to its extreme. And in that intensity lay her secret curse. She could conquer everything except her own heart. 8. Marlon Brando, the genius who couldn't live with himself. When Marlon Brando appeared on screen in A Streetcar Named Desire, Hollywood changed forever. He didn't just act, he detonated. His raw emotion, his defiance, his sensuality redefined masculinity and modern acting. From On the Waterfront to The Godfather, Brando became more than a star. He became a force of nature. But behind that brilliance was a man at war with everything: the studios, his family, and most of all, himself. The same intensity that made him a genius also made him impossible to live with. Born in Omaha in 1924, Brando grew up in a storm of neglect and trauma. His father was abusive. His mother was a beautiful alcoholic who taught him charm and chaos in equal measure. That early pain became the engine of his art. He could express suffering because he lived it. In his youth, he was magnetic, rebellious, irresistibly attractive. Yet fame, for Brando, was never a gift. It was a mirror that showed him everything he despised. He mocked Hollywood, sabotaged his own success, and treated acting as both salvation and punishment. By the 1960s, Brando had become notorious for his arrogance. Directors feared him, co-stars loathed him. Yet no one could deny his genius. The Godfather resurrected his career, but the man who played Don Corleone was already spiritually bankrupt. He retreated into his private island in Tahiti, hiding from a world that once worshipped him. The paradise he built became a fortress of guilt. Then came tragedy. In 1990, his son Christian shot and killed his half-sister's boyfriend during a drunken argument at Brando's home. The trial became a public circus and a devastating reminder of the family's instability. 5 years later, Brando's daughter Cheyenne, consumed by depression, hanged herself. Those losses destroyed him. Once a symbol of rebellion and desire, Brando became a recluse, obese, bitter, and terrified of the world he had conquered. He spent his final years in isolation, rarely leaving his house, surrounded by tapes of his past performances. When he died in 2004, his ashes were scattered in Tahiti and Death Valley, 2 landscapes that mirrored his contradictions: paradise and desolation. Marlon Brando remains the ultimate Hollywood paradox. a man who transformed cinema but could not transform his own pain. His life was a rebellion that turned inward, consuming everything it touched. For all his brilliance, Brando's greatest role may have been the one he never escaped, that of a man doomed by his own genius. 9. Jean Tierney, the beauty trapped in her own mind. Jean Tierney was the kind of woman Hollywood sculpted statues for: elegant, ethereal, untouchable. Her face, carved with perfect symmetry, and her haunting eyes made her one of the most magnetic stars of the 1940s. Critics called her the most beautiful woman in film. In classics like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven, she embodied mystery and passion. Yet behind those porcelain features was a woman silently unraveling, caught in a battle against her own mind, a battle she would fight for the rest of her life. Born in 1920 to a wealthy Connecticut family, Tierney seemed destined for perfection. Her upbringing was privileged, but also suffocating. Her father managed her career and controlled her finances, while her mother enforced rigid standards of behavior and appearance. Jean learned early to hide pain behind poise. When she entered Hollywood, her beauty opened every door, but it also imprisoned her in roles that valued her face over her soul. Her life changed forever in 1943 during her first pregnancy. While performing at a war bond event, a devoted fan with rubella, German measles, broke quarantine to meet her. The encounter seemed harmless until Tierney's baby, Daria, was born deaf, partially blind, and severely disabled. Jean never recovered from the guilt. She blamed herself for something that was never her fault, and the weight of that tragedy shattered her mental stability. Over the following years, Tierney's life became a series of breakdowns and hospitalizations. Diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder, she underwent electroshock therapy, a brutal treatment that left her memory fractured. Her once bright career faded as she withdrew from the public eye. Terrified of the spotlight that once adored her, she later confessed, "I was not mad. I was merely broken, and the pieces never fit again." Yet amid her suffering, there was resilience. Tierney returned briefly to acting in the 1950s, and though the glow of stardom had dimmed, her courage earned her a new kind of respect. She lived quietly after retiring, far from the chaos of Hollywood, raising awareness about mental health long before it was accepted to do so. Jean Tierney died in 1991, aged 70, leaving behind not a scandal, but a legacy of strength hidden beneath fragility. Her story remains one of the most heartbreaking in Hollywood, a reminder that sometimes the greatest beauty lies not in perfection, but in surviving what should have destroyed you. Rock Hudson, the perfect man who couldn't tell the truth. To the world, Rock Hudson was the ultimate American man, tall, square-jawed, confident, and impossibly handsome. He was Hollywood's leading heartthrob through the 1950s and 60s, the dream lover every woman wanted and every man wanted to be. On screen, he was strong yet gentle, charming yet masculine, the embodiment of the perfect heterosexual ideal. But behind the camera, Rock Hudson lived a lie so suffocating that it consumed his entire life. His greatest performance was not in giant or pillow talk, but in pretending to be someone he wasn't. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in 1925, Hudson grew up poor and painfully shy. He discovered early that he was different, and that difference was dangerous. In an era when homosexuality could end a career, he learned to hide, to charm, to act. When he arrived in Hollywood, studio executives transformed him into a fantasy. They gave him a new name, a new wardrobe, and strict orders. Never let the world know who you really are. His agent arranged public romances with actresses, and in 1955, he even entered a short-lived marriage to his secretary to silence growing rumors. Behind the scenes, Hudson's life was a delicate balancing act. He attended secret parties where gay men in Hollywood could be themselves for a few stolen hours, then returned to set to play the ideal lover for female co-stars like Doris Day and Elizabeth Taylor. The double life wore him down, but he accepted it as the price of fame. In private letters, he confessed he felt like a stranger to everyone, even myself. In the 1970s, as his career waned, Hudson turned increasingly to alcohol and fleeting relationships. Then, in the early 1980s, his health began to fail. In 1984, he was diagnosed with AIDS, a disease then whispered about with fear and disgust. Instead of hiding, he made a decision that changed history. He went public. His announcement in 1985 shocked the world, shattering Hollywood's illusion of perfection and forcing a global conversation about AIDS and compassion. Rock Hudson died later that year at 59. His courage in those final months transformed him from a closeted icon into a symbol of truth and dignity. The man who had lived his life pretending to be something he wasn't finally became something real, human. And in doing so, he gave a face to millions who had been forced to live in the shadows. Number 11. Bela Lugosi, the vampire who couldn't escape his curse. When Bela Lugosi stepped onto the stage in 1931 wearing a black cape and speaking in that thick, hypnotic accent, he didn't just play Dracula, he became him. His performance defined horror for generations, turning the Hungarian immigrant into an icon of the macabre. Women swooned, men imitated him. He was exotic, mysterious, unforgettable. But the role that made Bela Lugosi immortal also destroyed him. For the rest of his life, he would be haunted, not by monsters, but by addiction, poverty, and the darkness of his own creation. Born Bela Blasco in 1882 in what is now Romania, Lugosi fled war-torn Europe after World War I and arrived in America with broken English and dreams of stardom. His talent and charisma quickly earned him recognition on Broadway, and his portrayal of Dracula in 1931 cemented his place in film history. Yet Hollywood, fascinated by his accent and foreign mystique, typecast him instantly. To studio heads, he wasn't a man. He was a monster for hire. While contemporaries like Boris Karloff found diverse roles, Lugosi was trapped in a coffin of his own success. As roles dried up, his confidence crumbled. He turned to morphine and methadone to cope with chronic back pain. Remnants of years spent performing dangerous stunts. But what began as pain management soon spiraled into dependency. His addiction alienated him from studios, friends, and even his family. He became the tragic caricature of his screen persona, pale, trembling, and desperate for work. By the 1940s, Bela Lugosi was a ghost haunting B-movie sets, often paid in cash for single-day appearances. He worked with Ed Wood, a devoted fan and infamously bad director, in films so low budget they bordered on parody. Yet through humiliation and decay, Lugosi remained dignified. Even in Plan 9 from Outer Space, filmed shortly before his death, there was a strange nobility in his presence, as if the actor understood his own tragedy too well. In 1956, Lugosi checked himself into rehab, one of the first celebrities ever to do so publicly. The press mocked him, but he called it the best decision I ever made. Months later, on August 16th, he died of a heart attack in his small Los Angeles apartment, nearly penniless. Fittingly, he was buried in his Dracula cape, a man forever trapped in the role that gave him everything and took it all away. Bela Lugosi's story is Hollywood's cruelest irony. The actor who made audiences fear death was destroyed by life itself. 12. Rita Hayworth, the goddess who faded into shadows. She was the flame-haired goddess who made men weak and redefined Hollywood glamour. When Rita Hayworth appeared in Gilda, 1946, peeling off a single glove to the rhythm of Put the Blame on Mame, the world stopped breathing. Overnight, she became the ultimate fantasy, the pin-up queen of World War II, the dream of millions of soldiers. But while the world worshipped her, Rita's life was collapsing behind the scenes. She was adored by everyone, except herself. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in 1918 to Spanish dancer parents, Rita grew up in rehearsals, not classrooms. Her father pushed her into performance before she could read, forcing her to dance for adult audiences by the time she was 12. What looked like training was, in truth, exploitation. Years later, she confided that her father's discipline crossed into physical and emotional abuse, scars she carried for the rest of her life. Hollywood would continue that pattern of control. When Columbia Pictures discovered her, they erased her identity, bleaching her hair red, raising her hairline, and renaming her Rita Hayworth. The transformation was complete. She was no longer a person, but a product. At the height of her fame, Rita was Hollywood's most desired woman, and its most manipulated. Studio executives controlled her career, gossip columns controlled her image, and men controlled her life. She married 5 times, including to Orson Welles, who admired her mind but never understood her fragility, and Prince Ali Khan, whose promises of royal stability turned to betrayal. Men go to bed with Gilda, she once said bitterly, but they wake up with me. The The world wanted her to be the seductress she played, never the quiet, insecure woman she truly was. As the years passed, Rita's light began to fade. She drank to numb her anxiety, forgot lines on set, and struggled to maintain her once flawless image. What no one knew then was that her mind was deteriorating, not from alcohol, but from early onset Alzheimer's disease, long before the condition was widely understood. By the 1970s, the woman who had once lit up the screen could barely recognize her own family. The tabloids called her a washed-up drunk, unaware of the cruel truth behind her decline. Rita Hayworth died in 1987 at 68, cared for by her daughter Yasmin Khan. Only in death did the world understand her tragedy, the goddess of desire, destroyed not by scandal but by silence. Behind every glamorous photo was a frightened woman slowly disappearing, not from fame but from herself.